All right, let's get to media. Wanted to make sure we covered this important story. It's genuinely crazy, some of the details. Let's put this up there on the screen. So ABC News has agreed to pay $15 million to Donald Trump's presidential library to settle a defamation lawsuit. So the reason why this is so extraordinary is that it almost never happens that you have defamation lawsuits which are settled involving public officials.
Yeah.
The reason why is that the bar is so incredibly high to prove defamation. Nonetheless, ABC News agreed to this settlement on Saturday after a quote-unquote statement by George Stephanopoulos that happened on ABC News some months ago with respect to the E. Jean Carroll case. Now, if you look actually into the details, the settlement came right before there was a deposition that was going to go through, as well as discovery, which would have required Stephanopoulos turning over all of his emails, deposition of all the people that were involved in the segment. Now, the reason why, again, I think it's just so crazy is the fact that it even got to the deposition phase is extraordinary. Almost in every other one of these defamation cases, it's thrown out, which means that the Trump people had to rise to a bar where they at least were able to say to a judge that they could realistically prove malicious intent on behalf of Stephanopoulos. So again, I know this is complicated and just in plain speak. As commentators here, whenever we're talking about anybody who is a public official, especially an elected official, for them to prove defamation against us, they have to prove that not only did what we say was wrong, but that we knew it was wrong when we said it, and that we knew we were doing so specifically to harm the reputation of that individual.
A slip of the tongue.
Right.
Or a slight what he said was only a slight mischaracterization of the truth. Like, that is not sufficient unless you can prove what's called actual malice.
Exactly, actual malice, which is, I mean, again, unless you basically have it in writing, be like, hey,
I'm going to lie about Trump and say that he raped someone.
Yeah, so it's like, if I texted you and was like, hey, screw Donald Trump, I'm gonna go on the show and say today X, Y, and Z, even though I know X, Y, and Z is false. That is what they mostly need to destroy you. And yet, they decided to settle. So, two options. Either they're afraid and they decided to pay him off, or it was true. I'm starting to get to the point where, at least in terms of what they had, it must have been bad because, you know, to pay $15 million to a public official as a news organization is crazy. You're supposed to fight this thing to the bitterest end to make sure that there is no. So I think he might have been guilty, honestly, because there's no other reason, or they're just afraid. But I mean, even when we think about quote unquote afraid, I mean, think about the precedent that's being set here for defamation. That's right. That's why there's something in those emails that they don't ever want.
Whatever you think about this case, et cetera, and let me just lay out what he said and what the truth is, because it shows you how sort of like nitpicky this is and how it's an easy mischaracterization for people to make. And I'm quite confident that George Stephanopoulos, by the way, was not the only person who mischaracterized it this way. So he said that a jury in a civil case found Donald Trump liable for rape and defamation. Okay. In reality, based on the New York state law at that time, the jury found him liable for sexual assault, but not rape. Now, it would have met the definition of rape at the federal level. It would have met the definition of actually the newly revised definition of rape at the New York state level, but did not technically meet that definition at the time. So if he had been 100% accurate with the legal standards, he would have said sexual assault and not rape. But you see how close that is, right? And so, yeah, the assumption from anybody would be that in a defamation case, when you're considering that this is a public figure, when you're considering that even the judge in this case said that it would have, by this sort of like colloquial parlance, met the definition of rape, just not by the technical New York standard, you would assume that this would be something that they would fight and that they would ultimately be victorious because the bar is so incredibly high. Now, yours, I think you're right that there are two choices here. Number one is that they had something in Stephanopoulos' emails that was just absolutely terrible that they didn't want to come out.
Worth $15 million, his annual salary, that they didn't want to come out.
And that they're contributing now to the Donald J. Trump Presidential Library, which also looks disgusting. But anyway, either that or they are afraid of being at odds with Donald Trump. And I tend to put more stock into that one because if you think about it, I mean, Trump has been quite outspoken, and many of his allies quite outspoken about how they want to go up against their media critics, how they want retribution against their media critics. Steve Bannon going on and threatening Ari Melber with some sort of investigation and imprisonment, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think that they want to be, I think this could very well be another example of basically like Joe and Mika making their trek down to Mar-a-Lago. They don't want to be at war with the incoming Donald Trump administration. Not only are they fearful, but they also feel like they'll be the target of attacks, whether it's, you know, some sort of investigation or just Donald Trump's verbal attacks. They'll be subject to that. They'll lose whatever access they have to the White House, and it will impinge on their ability to like break stories and do their whole thing. And so I think that there's a good likelihood as well that they just were fearful of going into this administration actively at war and in this legal battle with Donald J. Trump. I personally think that it could be a little bit of both, but to me, that's the more likely explanation of what's going on here.
Look, yeah, like you said, it could be all of the above. I think, I don't know. I think to pay somebody, a public official, as the president, $15 million is nuts for any news organization. So I think the only alternative is, I think there was just something going on in those emails. I just don't think there's another explanation. There must have been some discussion that either related to him being informed that he was misspeaking, or maybe they could have proved that somebody was in his ear at the time and he had spoken differently. Again, like these are all speculations, but the idea that you would pay off an incoming president for the sum of Stephanopoulos' yearly salary shows extraordinary capitulation or extraordinarily liability.
In either case, it is extraordinary capitulation. Whether it's out of fear or because there's something that's damaging in Stephanopoulos' either way, it is extraordinary capitulation because it does set a damning precedent for just, freedom of the press. And as I said before, this was a very minor mischaracterization of what the civil jury actually found Trump liable for. And so for them to just bend the knee on this is really crazy. And it does set, frankly, a scary precedent. We put T3 up on the screen, which had some of the reaction online to this, mostly from liberals who were, really upset.
Well, a lot of them are journalists, too.
Yeah, journalists and liberals and prosecutors, too, who were confused by this direction. So you had Norm Ornstein, who said, add ABC to the basket of cowards in our media. Democratic attorney Mark Elias wrote, knee bent, ring kissed. Another legacy news outlet chooses obedience. Reporter Oliver Willis chimed in saying, this is actually how democracy dies. Tech reporter Matt Novak said, not good for the rest of us when you do this shit, ABC, but that's probably half the point from management's perspective. True. Former prosecutor Joyce Vance said, I'm old enough to remember to have worked on cases where newspapers vigorously defended themselves against defamation cases instead of folding before the defendant was even deposed. So again, quite a significant reaction to this. And I do think it is a significant development and quite surprised. I mean, I was shocked to see it. Especially once I read the details of what the allegations were.
The only option is the insurance company told them to settle. That's it. So I previously, because I studied actually some defamation cases. This is a case many years ago involving, what's his name? To Catch a Predator guy, Chris Hansen. Chris Hansen. There was a whole defamation case that was against him. The insurance company, I believe, forced him to settle. He's spoken out against it. And he's like, I never should have settled. He's like, I didn't agree with settling it. But the insurance company forced basically NBC News to settle. I guess that could be a theory. But, in this case, at the very least, Stephanopoulos and others have not come out and said this was an insurance decision. Because even at that time, NBC was significantly criticized for settling that case that involved, I forget exactly what it was, either defamation or wrongful death or something like that was involved. It was a crazy case, by the way, just to go and look into it.
It's also interesting. So they were also forced to append an editor's note to the article about Nancy Mace thing and whatever. And the editor's note is very non-specific. It says something just like, ABC News regrets some of the statements made by George Stephanopoulos in this segment. That's it.
That's a mistake,
It's like
too.
really
that might
non-specific.
be why as well, because that's another thing people don't understand is you have to have recourse. So what happens is the Trump people could reach out to you and they could say, hey, we're going to sue you for defamation unless you issue a correction. So maybe they refused to issue a correction. That could
Well, the editor's note was part of this settlement.
Oh, part of the settlement?
And
so they
it
never
was just
issued
weird. It was, I don't know. That I'm not sure about. But it was weird to me that the language was so like general and non-specific and wasn't like, George Stephanopoulos was wrong when he said blah, blah, blah.
Weird.
So anyway, it is weird.
If you work at ABC, let us know because I want to know more about this.
Yeah. Or reach out to Ken.
Reach out to Ken. Reach out to me. Listen, I'll publish anything. I'll publish whatever you guys want as long as it's true.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.